Welcome, everybody. My name is Joanne Snapp, and I want to thank the Health Professions Advising Center at UCR for having me this spring quarter and sharing um, my experience and knowledge all about applying to med school or all the health professions. So we're going to kick it off today with a kind of like a to-do list. So there's a lot. I know when you're applying to any health profession, there's so many things going through your mind. You're probably hearing all these things from different sources about preview and Casper and when do I send transcripts and when does the app open and when should I be doing all of this? And there's a lot of pressure to get it all done. So we're going to break that down today and just kind of go through it step by step. And I'm going to share with you some important dates that you want to keep in mind as we go through this process. And if anybody has any questions at all, please unmute, yell them out, post them in the chat. I really would love to answer all of your questions. That's way more important to me than making sure that that I'm just reading off my PowerPoint. So I'd rather this be a conversation. So this is a lot of words, and I'm gonna just mostly talk, and if you want to screenshot this and look at it later, that's totally fine. If you're applying this cycle, there is I get asked every single day, if I'm starting right now, is it too late? And my question back to them is, why are you asking me that? If you are going to apply this cycle, it's not about whether you're late or not. It's just you've got to get started. It's time right now to get started on your application. And there are a lot of things you have to do, but they're very manageable if you think about them in terms of steps. So right now, if you're applying this spring, you should be working on your personal statement. And if you haven't done that yet, it's okay, don't panic. But this is a really good time to carve out a couple of hours on a quiet afternoon where you go sit down somewhere and you really start brainstorming, what am I going to write about? And you start writing out some stories. Now, I always joke with people because everybody, puts the personal statement on this pedestal. It's like the most important part of your app, and it is. I'm not saying it's not. But how many times in college did you write a 2 or 3 page paper the night before it was due? And you still got an A on it, right? So I know that a lot of you are very capable of writing a page and a quarter very quickly. And this is not something you want to write quickly and turn in, but I think what really prevents people from sitting down and writing it is not that it's hard to write a page and a quarter, but that it's scary. This is a very scary thing to start because it's very loaded, right? Like there's a lot of fear associated with this process. And so people tend to hesitate and procrastinate in that way. So if you kind of just rip the Band-Aid off and you say, I've carved out these 2 hours, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to get this done. You have to do that. That's the first step. Once you get that drafted, go see an advisor, go see Charlie, go see Ashley, see somebody and let someone look at it. Actually, I think you all use Writing Center, right? So go see one of the writing specialists and have somebody look at that because this is not an intuitive process. People are not born just knowing how to write med school essays. It's something that you have to learn. And it's something that from seeing many, many essays over the years, you start to realize what works and what doesn't work. And I think people tend to just want to ask their friends to help them with that. And I always say, well, what experience has your friend had? Maybe they're great at editing, which is great. Like have your friend edit, but you should really see a professional advisor or somebody who's seen some personal statements in the past so that they know like, okay, you're on the right track. At least you're doing this in the right way. After you get that up and running and you have like a couple of drafts moving, the next big thing you need to do is start drafting your experience writing. Now, everyone puts all the emphasis on the personal statement because it's a big deal, but truthfully, that's 5,300 characters, let's say for med school. Your experience descriptions, when all 15 of those are written out and your meaningful experiences are written out, those actually end up being about 10,000 characters. So your experience descriptions are twice as long as your personal statement. And oftentimes people put those on the back burner going, oh, I'll just wait till the last minute and get those, throw those together. That's a really crafty piece of writing where you have to show all these things you learned and all the stuff you took away from these experiences in an itty bitty space. So you really want to make sure that you are spending enough time, crafting those, revising those, and starting that early. So I'd say do those two things simultaneously and be working on them as you go. Another big part of the app that I'm finding every day people don't know about is the impactful experience description. I think everybody knew about the disadvantage statement before it became the impactful experience description. A lot of people had maybe identified as, oh, I don't need to write that. when it changed to the impactful experience description, for some reason that piece of writing just kind of fell through the cracks in people's minds. So the impactful experience description is very similar to the disadvantage statement. It's a 1325 character block in the biographic information section of AMCAS. Some apps, different apps have different versions of this. I'm going to primarily just talk about this as an AMCAS feature for right now, because I'm assuming a lot of you are pre-med. But this section is a good place for them to understand who you are and where some of the things you've gone through in your life. And so examples of this might include if you came from a household where, anybody in your house struggled with any type of like mental illness or substance abuse, if your family struggled financially, if you experienced any period of being houseless, if there was any period of your life where there was struggle and you it doesn't necessarily mean you had a bad childhood. People often go, "Well, I actually was very happy and I was very, I had a really great childhood, but yeah, we had some struggles in our household." That doesn't mean you shouldn't write this. It's just a way for them to understand what are some of the challenges your family faced growing up. And this is predominantly prior to the age of 18. However, I've seen impactful experiences written about people who've maybe lost parents during college or experienced other major life events during college. So that's something you want to get up and running if you're going to do that. I would say about 50% of people don't write that. You don't have to write it. And it really should be based on your life and not based on like a clinical experience or something like that. So those are the big pieces of the writing that you should have up and running at this point. And again, not trying to create panic in anybody if you haven't. It's just I'm trying to light a fire. So if you haven't done it, now is the time, right? You got to get going on that. AMCAS opens in a month. And once AMCAS opens and all the other apps open right around the same time, Casper is going to be opening very soon. You're going to want to get in there and start entering your coursework and ordering your transcripts and just filling it all out. And it's going to be hard for you to want to do all of that while you're also finishing up your writing. So I would really use April to get that up and running, get that done as much as you can so that you can just be, filling out the app next month. By now, you should also have asked for all of your letters of rec. And I know sometimes that's hard if you're waiting for spring courses to ask, but you should have some of your letters of rec requested. And I get asked a lot, well, what happens if I ask them and they haven't responded to me? If you've asked a professional person, like a faculty member or any professional, like a physician, and you've got no response, make sure I would ask at least 3 times before you give up on that person. I would try to space those out maybe a couple of weeks. And when you ask the second time, don't try to make them feel bad because they didn't answer you the first time. Just nicely ask again and see, and maybe change up your wording a little bit and just, let them know that you need a letter of rec for medical school. Let them know the context that they worked with you. Let them know how they know you. Sometimes they forget you. That's fair. They meet a lot of people. And I even recommend maybe attaching your personal statement or your resumes just so they have some context again for who you are. And when you write that letter request, make sure you're giving them some idea about what you'd like for them to say in that letter. So if you want them to talk about your academics or your experience, whatever that is, that way they know what it is you're hoping they would write about. And that should be done now. If you haven't done that, try to get those out as soon as possible, because you want to give people at least a 30-day notice whenever you're asking for a letter of rec. That's the common courtesy. If you're asking for someone and you turn around and say, "Oh, I need that letter done within 3 weeks," most professionals are going to, kind of low key judge you on that. They're going to be like, "Wait, you should have been more organized. You should have been prepared and had that ready." So after all that, if you have all this up and running and you are good to go, then the next big thing you want to do is get your school list started. I could talk for an entire hour on how to do a school list, and I think I actually am going to do that. But this is something that takes a lot of time if you're going to do it well. I think the easiest way to create a school list is using MSAR or using your friend's school list from last year. But honestly, those are really terrible ways to create a school list because when you write your secondaries for the schools, you really have to tailor every secondary individually to those schools. You need to be able to name very specific things about the school that you are tied to based on your goals and your interests. And in order to know those things about the school, you actually have to do the work. You have to dig in their website. You have to find those clubs, find the clinic names, find the communities they serve. That takes a lot of time. And so if you can start doing a little bit of research here and there now and start building your school list as you go along, it won't be such a monumental task when you're writing secondaries to try to be digging all that stuff out. Also, the better your school list in terms of tying who you are to who they are, the more success you're going to see because you're picking schools that make sense for who you are. So if you're someone who has spent a lot of time working in urban underserved communities, um, and you're applying to schools that predominantly serve rural communities, you're not going to make a lot of sense to them. So you need to make sure you know a lot of stuff about the schools before you even add them to your list. Um, the very last thing you should be doing right now is making sure you've checked Casper to see if any of the schools you're planning to apply to are in Casper. I saw this year that there's a big decrease in the number of schools in Casper, so just double check Casper to see if you need it. Usually pre-meds, pre-PAs, and pre-dental students need Casper. And then preview is for pre-meds only, and most of you from California are going to need that because there are a few California schools on there. Okay, that is your big to-do list. And of course, as we get closer to May, there's going to be other things you're going to need to do. So once we get into May and you open up your application, don't open an app until the first day it opens because that's not your current cycle. You're going to be in the 2025 cycle. So once you open up that application, the first thing I would do if I were you is go in and I would add your schools into the application. I would add all of the schools you've attended. And everyone is like, oh, but I attended this one school and I took a class and I transferred that class to UCR, so I shouldn't have to send that transcript because it's on the UCR transcript. Wrong. Every single school you ever attended in the history of your life, even if you just took basket weaving, has to go into AMCAS. It has to go into every application. So once you add those schools in there, there's going to be this little PDF form that pops out as a link. And on that form is going to have an ID number, a transcript ID number. And you're going to take that and go to the UCR registrar site, and you're going to be able to send your transcripts electronically straight to AMCAS. And you should do that as soon as you can. If you are waiting for your spring grades, you can hold for spring grades, but you can order those transcripts so that as soon as your spring grades hit, your request is in and they'll go to AMCAS. And it usually takes, or any application, it usually takes just a couple of days on a couple business days. If you have other schools, like let's say you transferred or you took classes at a CC during the summer, go ahead and start researching how to order transcripts because not every school is the same. And some schools may want you to send a check, or some schools may want you to walk in and order it. I doubt that. But let's say there's a process and you don't know your ID number and you're scrambling in May trying to figure it out and it delays sending your transcripts. You're going to be really panicking when your app is being delayed being verified because the transcripts haven't arrived. So it's really good to take the time to figure that out now if you've attended multiple colleges. And then once you open your app, the next thing you're going to do is also add your letters. If you're using the application system for your letters, you're just going to add them right in there. And if you're using Interfolio, then you're going to connect them through Interfolio. And there are a lot of really great YouTube videos on how to connect Interfolio to AMCAS and ACOMAS and all the other applications if you can't figure it out. But they have really clear step-by-step directions. You just have to slow down and read the directions. And if you get stuck, ask an advisor. But like I said, I usually go and watch the YouTube video, honestly, because there are some people who made some really nice YouTube videos on that. And then after you're done with all of that, that's the whole month of May. Then you're going to submit your app, and you can submit it at the end of May or anytime in June. And once you're done with all of your writing, we're going to start pre-writing secondaries. And so what that means is you're going to pull the prompts from last year, and you can find those prompts in a variety of sources online. And you're going to sit down, you're going to start writing out the prompts. And sometimes those prompts do change, but most of the time they don't. Most of the time they stay pretty similar. When they do change, people get a little frustrated because they pre-wrote them. But honestly, there's so much recycling of questions that even if you write something and it changes, don't get too upset. You'll probably end up using it for something else. So you spend June pre-writing. And of course, all of this, I'm not mentioning anything about tests. So I'm assuming you've already taken your test at this point. If you're also taking a test during any of this time, like April, May, or June, obviously you have to factor that in as well. And that creates a little bit more of a time crunch and a little bit more stress. And sometimes people push off submitting or obviously push off pre-writing secondaries if they are also taking a test during this time, which is very reasonable. You should definitely focus on your test rather than worry about pre-writing secondaries. So you are going to start getting a bunch of secondaries if you submit early on the first day or so, around the first, actually, if you submit in the first couple weeks of June, you should start getting secondaries around the first and second week of July. And what that looks like is a whole lot of emails. And people often get really overwhelmed and a little stressed out about the number of emails that they get. Um, those first emails that come through are just application acknowledgement emails. They're just the automatic emails the schools send that say, hey, we got your application. So they're not reading your app at that point. They're not opening it. Nothing is happening. They're just acknowledging that we got your email or we got your application. And so at that time, hopefully you've pre-written some secondaries so that as soon as they do start sending you secondaries out, you can start and populating those and submitting them. There's a lot of information out in the universe that says, oh, you have to do your secondaries within 2 weeks. Here's what I always say. There are schools that actually do have timeline or have a deadline. And if the school has a timeline on the secondary, then you have to follow that. If they say you have to have it done in 2 weeks, then you have to do that. And you might want to know which schools those are when you first get your secondary, make note of that. But most schools don't actually have a deadline. They don't say you have to have it done within 2 weeks. They may say we recommend a month. And the reason why they do that is honestly because they want to speed you up because they want to get this process going faster. But that doesn't mean that if you don't submit it within the 2 weeks, you're over, it's done for, you're never going to get it doesn't work like that. So schools are going to read applications as they come in over the month of, July, August, and September. The people who submit fast do get screened faster. That's true. And they might get considered for interviews earlier. That is true. But here's the thing. If you submit early and you submit with a not well-written essay, you didn't submit early to your benefit. You just submitted early. And if it's not a well-written essay, they're probably not going to invite you to interview. They can read, like they're very smart people. They can read this and go, oh, this isn't written very well. So it might be to your benefit to write a really good essay, even if it takes you a few days longer. And I'd rather you submit a little bit later with a well-written essay than just rushing, like a rat race to get it done and not putting any effort into that writing. And I've read a lot of people's secondaries and they just literally just slap things in there just to get it done and submit it. And that's so not a good idea. When I used to work at a medical school, one thing I saw all the time, people would actually do their secondary so fast that they would accidentally put the wrong school name in the secondary. And then they would email the next day, like in complete panic mode because they had the wrong name. And there was nothing we could do. Like we can't, send it back to them to fix it. So I just had to tell them, like, I'm sorry, like that's kind of just what has to be. Hopefully the screener who reads your app doesn't care that much. They were, of course, upset and mortified and all of that. But that's why you want to do it carefully. You want to write your secondaries really, really well. And I'd rather you submit a secondary at the end of July or the beginning of August, or even the end of August. If it's written well, you have as much chance as someone who submits earlier if their app isn't written as well. That makes sense? So the schools are going to look at your app and go, okay, this is a good app. We're going to invite them no matter when it comes in. And I honestly, to be really honest with you, I have had people who submit their apps in August and September and they still got interviews and they still got accepted. So it is not, I mean, it's important to do them fast, but it's also very, very possible to do them a little bit later and still be okay. So this is just a visual of what I had just said. Again, if you want to take a screenshot and look at it later, that's totally fine. But everything just kind of happens over the course of, the next few months. And then after August, after you submit all your secondaries, then everything comes to like a screeching halt. And that's the hardest part. I always joke, every part of this process is the hardest part, right? And then once you get to the part where you just have to wait, where you've submitted everything, you're done, you can't do anymore, and you just have to wait for interviews to come in, that Everyone agrees that is the hardest part of this process because you put so much time and energy and money into this, and now you have no control anymore. There's nothing more to do. You just have to sit back and see what happens. And in reality, interviews come from, DO schools will send interviews in July. And I have people, like I have a dental applicant I was working with who just got an interview in March for a dental school. I've had medical school applicants who didn't get an interview until June of the next year, like 1 month before med school starts. Um, the process is not over by the fall. And I always like it irritates me so bad when I see people out in the universe, like on Instagram or wherever, and they'll say things like, "Oh, if you haven't had an interview by November, by Thanksgiving, you should start reapplying." And I'm just like, "No, people get interviews after January all the time, all the time. Interviews come January, February, March, April, May, all the way through. And that's so hard because you want to be done. And by that point, you're even thinking, oh, am I going to be a reapplicant? But unfortunately, that's just kind of how it works. And so waiting all that time is really, really hard on people. You need to work full time, you need to have hobbies, you need to have two jobs, volunteer, do everything you can to keep your mind off of that process. Because waiting to hear back also, like you may interview in October and then you may not hear anything from them until the following spring, which is brutal, absolutely brutal. I'm going to pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions about this timeline? Did I forget any piece of the app?
This is really good. No, I think you're being really thorough, and I like the piece about the timeline that it is really sort of staggered from inception to completion. So different health professions do different things, different schools do different things, and I think it's just important to realize that it's not finished until it's finished. So until you hear something from the school, you know, kind of avoid what you see on Reddit or other blogs, and really sort of look at what the school is posting. That school within itself, or if you're really in the gray, email them or call them. A lot of schools have mechanisms for communication on their website of, where to follow up. So instead of just reading online to a non-vetted source, go to the source and ask if you have questions.
Absolutely. Yes. So many people are so ready to give out information, and it's sometimes really amazing how they come to these conclusions like, oh, if you're interviewing at this point, you're interviewing for a wait list. And I'm like, how would you know that? Like, how you don't work for admissions? Like, how could you possibly know that? Um,
Yes.
Everybody wants to help, right? Any other questions about the timeline, like when you should be doing things, when to expect to hear back? I did forget to mention a couple of important dates. October 15th is the first date that allopathic med schools will send acceptances. So if you hear anybody gets accepted to med school before October 15th, you would assume that they got accepted to a DO school because no one's accepting until then. After October 15th, it's just a pretty regular flow of acceptances that come out. People can get waitlisted from the first interview day all the way through the last interview day. People can get accepted off the wait list at any point throughout that cycle. Now, there's another big date that's in med school world, which is March 15th, and that's the date that a lot of big name schools like Ivies and top schools will send out all of their acceptances. And after March 15th, we sometimes see this kind of trickle down effect where, the people who were waiting to hear back from the Ivy League schools who were holding at other schools, the once they get accepted to their Ivy League school, then they're like, "Oh, I'm done with that." And they start withdrawing from all the other schools, which then opens up more seats and more people get accepted from wait lists. April 29th is usually the date where people have to commit to one school. There's a lot of waitlist movement after April 29th because, again, that trickle down effect. Once someone gets accepted off the waitlist, they'll withdraw from the other schools, and then those schools have to accept, and then so on and so forth. So throughout the entire month of May, there's usually a lot of movement with waitlists, and I always really like to normalize waitlists being waitlisted. People sometimes perceive that as like, oh, if I'm waitlisted, I failed in some way. So honestly, schools just have to waitlist people. They can't accept everybody up front. They have to hold some, they have to have some people on, on hold in the back because once everyone starts withdrawing, they have to accept more people. But they can't just pre-accept everybody because then they may, God forbid, they have a huge class of accepted people and some of those people don't withdraw, they'd be in trouble. So waitlist is just part of the process. It's not an indication that you did anything wrong or anything is bad or wrong. It's just how it works. But I know that's also a really hard thing to get past if you were waitlisted. A question in the chat for the Casper and preview, what score should we aim for? Do both scores matter as much? Oh, no, no, no. So no, they don't matter as much as the MCAT, not even close. Um, I would say that if you can get a 50th percentile on preview, like 5 out of 10, I'd personally, I'd be happy. I don't know that I would retake it if I got a 5 out of 10. I've had a lot of students who don't do well in Casper and preview, like bottom quartile, and they have gotten into pretty good med schools. Even schools that require Casper seem to not really care about the Casper score, as far as I can see. Casper scored in quartiles and um, nobody wants to be in the bottom quartile. You do the best you can. I think if for preparing for Casper and preview, I think the best thing you can do is look at the materials that are available. The AMC has a really great 80 plus page practice test. And if you go through those practice questions, and at the end, they actually have a key that gives you the rationale for their answers. So if you do the questions and then you read the rationales for the answers, you might start to pick up on some logic. Now, I will be honest, I've done a lot of these practice questions with people, and some of the logic isn't consistent. But you might be able to pick on some of the logic that you can apply to questions, and then you start to realize, like, okay, this is what they're looking for. This is how you answer the questions. For Casper, I would focus more on practice typing for 5 minutes. So pulling the practice prompts from online and just setting a timer and seeing how much you can write in those 5 minutes. Some people are really good typers, like they type really fast, and some people kind of struggle to put words on paper. It's definitely a disadvantage for people who struggle to put words on paper because you got to say a lot of things in a short amount of time. Keep in mind they don't grade for editing or typos or spelling, grammar, nothing like that. So you're not going to lose any points for how it's written, but they do need to understand your ideas. So you have to write well enough to be able to articulate your ideas. Yeah, that preview exam, practice exam is really helpful. I use it all the time. So do the best you can, study as much as you can. Don't study for more than like a few hours for this, honestly. Do not dedicate like weeks to studying for this is not worth it. Just study, look at it for a few hours, do some practice typing, do some practice thinking, and then take the test and be done with it. And honestly, I don't know that I would retake preview at all. Casper, you cannot retake, so that's easy. Um, and let it go. It feels bad if you don't do well on a test, but you just have to let it go because it's not that important, in my opinion. I shouldn't say that. Probably preview people would not like me saying that. It is a very important test and you should try hard on it. Any other questions? Okay, let's keep going. So I split this presentation into a couple of topics because one of the big topics that comes up a lot with timelines is gap year. A lot of people have concerns about their gap year, whether it's going to hurt them, what they should be doing, and just basically how to prepare if you are or are not taking a gap year. So I thought we could talk about that a little bit, but I wanted to just kind of pause with this quote because I've always said, my favorite quote has always been that, first of all, life is not linear, that we can have the best laid out plans for ourselves. And sometimes those really good plans just don't work because of things that are out of our control. And yes, sometimes the MCAT is one of those things that is out of our control. And you can have this plan in your head, and everybody knows about this plan that you have. And if something happens and you can't do that plan, it's easy to feel really bad about that. It's easy to, beat yourself up and say, oh, I messed up, I failed, this and that, and then just feel bad. But I really encourage you just to remember that, first of all, like everybody is going to have a different life plan, and there's no right or wrong plan. This whole idea of a timeline and this whole idea of gap years and no gap years, these are fabricated concepts made up by man that are imposed upon young people. And some of these concepts make people feel really bad about what they're doing with their own life. And they think that, oh, if I'm taking 2 gap years or 3 gap years or taking time off or doing this, that somehow this means something about me. And it really doesn't. Again, these are just, it's like whatever you choose to do with your life. If you take, some time off after you graduate college and you work for a couple of years, if you apply once and you don't get in, you have to take a year off and apply later. If you have to do a post-bac program, everything you do in your life is yours, right? You own that. It's all relative based on the experiences that you've had, whether that is having a rocky college experience and needing a post-bac program, or just not being ready. Some people graduate college and they're just not mature, like they're not ready to jump into this. They want to take some time off and work for a year or two. Everybody has their own situations, and I really encourage you not to get into conversations with people about what they're doing and why and this and that, because that conversation never really makes people feel good if you have to justify why you're taking years off. Just celebrate everybody for whatever decisions they make and say, okay, that's cool that you're going to take a year off. Like, I hope you have a good time this year. Like, to try to relax, try to enjoy life a little bit too. Remember that you're a whole person and not just an applicant, and that applying is something you do on the side of your life. It's not your whole life, right? Going to work somewhere is not your whole life. It's not your whole identity. It's just what you do on the side of your regular life. So, I say this because I hear all the time there's just so much stress and fear associated with timelines, and I wanted to stress this part too, because I don't want you to think that I'm on that side thinking that all these timelines and all this is the most important thing. And I really don't think it is. I think the most important thing is how you feel and how you are able to get through all of this and maintain, some sense of normalcy and self, and, maintaining your mental health through all of this. So now, with that said, that was my little mid break soapbox. We'll continue on. So the gap year versus no gap year. Anybody, I wish it was a little bit more interactive, but is there anybody here who's really afraid that taking a gap year is going to hurt them in some way or is going to cause some harm? I can just do a rhetorical question since we're recording. I hear it all the time that people are nervous about how this gap year is going to affect them. And first of all, I have to stress that taking a gap year is actually way, way more normal now than not taking a gap year. And that wasn't always the case. This has been an evolution I've watched over the last 15 years, where it used to be people had to explain in the application why they took a gap year. Um, and someone wrote, I'm not taking or I'm not nervous about one gap year, but it might extend to many. And that's kind of where I was going with this, like when I kind of chuckled, because I'm thinking in my head, like, if you're stressing about one gap year, in reality, so many people are taking multiple gap years now. It is so normal. I would say the new normal is 2 gap years. And this is what that looks like. So if you graduate college and you haven't taken your MCAT, or you took it in college and didn't do well, you end up taking a year off, and right after you graduate, you study for the MCAT or you study for whatever test. You give it full-time work, right? You study for that test as a full-time endeavor. Maybe it's the summer after you graduate. And you study, you take the test, and then you start working. So if you're taking 2 gap years, you're going to apply 1 year after you graduate. What that looks like is you're going to start prepping your app, ideally like 6 months before you apply. So by January after you graduate, 6 months later after you graduate, you're going to start building your application. That's really not that long, right? So once you start building your app, everything's going to be busy. You're going to be writing personal statements, experiences, Casper, preview, all this stuff. That summer after you graduate, 1 year after you graduate, you're hitting submit on your app. And then the next year is wrapped up with applying. You're going to work full time over that year. You're going to be interviewing, and then you're going to start 2 years after you graduate. And that to me feels also very busy. Like that's a lot to do in a 2 year period. And that might 2 years might sound like a long time to you, but I promise you, as you start hitting your 40s, 2 years is nothing. Like, you blink and 2 years goes by. And it's going to be that way for you too in your gap years. It's going to go so fast. You're going to be so busy worrying about so many things. Sometimes people have to take the test multiple times. So you could plan to take it after you graduate. You might get your score back. You don't like your score. You're taking it again and again. So you're going to be so occupied with all of this that it's not going to take very long. So other reasons why people take gap years though, especially if you're graduating soon, if you're close to that, if you have a GPA that makes you a little nervous, and by nervous, I mean like maybe below a 3.0, then taking a gap year might be a good time to consider taking more courses. And you can do that through postbac or do it yourself, it doesn't matter. But that's a really good reason to take some time off and continue building on your application. Um, I don't have it on here for some reason, but also experiences. If you graduate college and your experiences with patients have been really minimal, if you realize that, everything you've done has been maybe like just in a volunteer sitting where you haven't really had in-depth experiences getting to interact with patients. Um, I know that there are a lot of people applying who have worked for a couple of years or more in healthcare settings, like as a clinical research coordinator or working as a scribe or a medical assistant. And those people tend to be very successful in this process. And so, if you haven't done anything with patients where you've got to really talk to them and interact with them, that might be something you want to do. And so, taking a little bit of extra time, it's not that you can't get in without doing that. You definitely can. It changes the experience a lot. Sometimes people barely get in and maybe they have to apply to schools they weren't really aiming for originally. If you take extra time and you address any weaknesses that you have, it changes the whole experience for you. So now you're not like, barely getting in. You're getting in with a lot of acceptances and you get options. You get to choose where you want to go. And so sometimes if you just take that extra time and invest in yourself before you hit submit, it really changes the application experience for you. And then, of course, that's more time, but at the end, you get to go where you want to go versus um, hoping it works out because you're going in with a weakness. Sometimes people just have to take time off because they have to work. Sometimes they have finances, they have to take care of some things. And that's okay. Like if you have to deal with some finance, like just saving up money or paying stuff off, if you just can't afford to apply right now, there's no shame in that. Like take the time you need, work full time, save the money, and apply when you're ready. And then other reasons people take time off is they have a lot going on in college. They have a lot of maybe they're in sports or they're in some other activities that just really make it difficult to balance everything. And so they decide to, not do everything in college. They decide to slow down in college and spread it out after they graduate. And I'm gonna just skip the last one, but the very last one, honestly, sometimes the parents are sometimes the ones who make people apply early, even if they don't want to apply early. I'm just being honest. If you are being pressured to apply and you don't really want to apply, that's a really hard conversation to have. And sometimes people just apply, just to appease their parents. But I would say try your best to have that conversation and show them some data and show them how common it is, but that's a really personal conversation you've gotta have. But it is a factor. I have heard that a lot over the years that parents and family and friends have some impact on that decision. Any questions about gap years or no gap years? I don't think the schools at all care whether you take a gap year or not. I think that the expectation now is that you have had some life experience before you jump into going to school. And the more life experience you have, the older you are, the more mature you are, the more successful you're probably going to be.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And the only thing that I'll add to this is that we at HPAC at UCR see students during their gap years. So once you graduate, you're considered an alumni or an alumnus or an alumna. And we work with you through that process. I know some other UC campuses and other colleges and universities don't work with you through, after graduation and as a gap or a glide or growth year student, but we do. So just following up on what Joanne said, schools don't really have a preference. If you've grown and you are making yourself more competitive or you're taking care of yourself for the reasons that Joanne shared, we're going to support you in that process as well.
You're very lucky to have that. Very, very lucky. So take advantage of that. All right. So I don't think that most people here are in this stage of still being in your second or third year. I think everyone here today is applying. And so I don't think I need to go through this timeline too much, but I want to stop and see if anybody has any questions about anything I said today about related to timelines. You all have a to-do list written down. You know exactly what you need to do to be ready to apply this spring. Give me a thumbs up if you're good to go. Awesome. All right, we got a couple thumbs. Very good. If you have any questions, Charlie, are you all still doing drop-in advising?
We are, yes. So for spring quarter and also in the summer, we will have drop-ins. Our drop-ins in the spring are done with our ambassadors. And Ashley and I will also be supporting students who are applying, but we will have some limited staffing in spring quarter. So if you're applying, we want to work with you. If you are preparing to apply, maybe you are a first year, second year, or maybe you are a junior or senior, but you're here thinking about the next year or so, feel free to meet with our ambassadors. We actually have two ambassadors this year who've already been accepted to professional programs, one medical school, and that student will be starting at UCR School of Medicine in the fall. And then we have another student who has been accepted to podiatry school. So a medical school, dental school, pharmacy school, optometry school, pharmacy, vet, they all follow much of the same process. So our ambassadors can support you, but again, Ashley and I will try, to meet with you we will meet with you if you're applying this quarter. For summer, we will have likely more drop in with advisors. We currently use ambassadors, but in the summer we will be doing some drop in hours with myself, Ashley, and we'll hopefully have an additional advisor on staff by then. So yes, just keep connected with us. Check our social media, check our website, and we'll have information there.
Awesome. I see two questions, one in the chat and then one from Sierra.
I can just go really quick. So my question is it like acceptable to ask our letter of like our recommenders via email? Like is email like I feel like part of me wants to make like a phone call or do like it in person or something, but it's kind of hard with schedules. Is that like okay?
Yeah, you want to do that because you're a nice person and you think that you want to meet with them and you want them to know you. I know that's where that's coming from. But the thing is that the people who are writing your letters, like you said, are very busy and they get lots and lots of requests. I bet they probably get 20, 30 requests at least a semester. So they don't have time to have a sit down coffee, meeting with everybody. Sometimes they'll do that for people who have been really involved with them, but for the majority of people, they just can't. And what I've heard a lot of faculty say to me is that they really don't mind the email request as long as the email request is really professional and you've given them enough content to talk about. So if you just ask for a letter of rec, but you provide no context for how they know you, what you think they should talk about, nothing. Like you give them nothing to work with. They can't, they're like not magicians. They can't come up with something out of thin air. You've got to tell them what you want them to say. And so the more you make that easy on them by writing a really nice cover letter that has like some specific examples from your experiences with them, like, based on how I did in your lab with working with your TA, Jessica, I really feel like you'd be the best advisor or professor to comment on my, ability to do this, this, and this. So you got to give them something to work with. But I would just shoot the email and rip the band-aid off and just send lots of emails and just write each one tailored to each person. Again, make sure you use the right names and everything. And try lots of different people because professors, a lot of times, like they know you need these letters and they want to help you. They get a lot of requests, but if you ask early and you're consistent asking, I would ask 3 times before I gave up on somebody. A lot of times they'll say yes because they want to help you. Like they don't want to, like they want to be supportive of you. Another question I got is, I was wondering when you think the best time to take Casper preview and how long should I prepare? I would take it by July if you can, because there are some schools that use the scores for screening for secondaries. And so if you can get it by July, perfect. How long should you prepare? I don't know if I have like a concrete number, but like I said earlier, I think that a few hours should be plenty for this. If you take the preview exam and you do all 30 questions, that would take you a little while. If you read you're reading the prompts and you're thinking about it and you're reading the justifications for your answers, I don't know how many hours that would take you, maybe a couple hours. After you do all 30 questions, there really isn't more you can do. There shouldn't be any other material out there because this is the AMC material. For Casper, if you can't type 3 answers in 5 minutes, then I would practice your typing speed. I would practice getting really comfortable doing that. And so maybe that might require more practice just in terms of thinking on your feet and being able to fill out 3 questions. There are lots and lots of sample Casper prompts out in the universe. You can find them by Googling it. I don't know if HBAC has a database of any, but you can definitely find some out there. I got a message. Should I email my professors for letters before I graduate, or can I do it after graduation? I'm worried they won't remember me. Yeah, I would, if you're graduating and you're taking a couple of gap years, I would ask them before you leave and just let them know what your timeline is, because they probably will write the letter before you leave and just keep it saved. You could possibly open up an Interfolio account and collect it, but if you're not applying for a couple of years, the letter will be dated, 2 years old. And so it might be better for you to just ask them, let them know what you're doing, tell them about Interfolio and say, I'll email you in about a year if you wouldn't mind, updating the date at that time and uploading it if they say, if they agree to do it. But I would ask before you leave. Sorry, all of my answers are so long-winded, but I feel like they need explanation. Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
So back to the letter of recommendation. Sorry, I have a couple. So I guess my question is it like smart to go through the competencies and then like pick out the ones that you think that they could speak on and then ask them to include those in the letter? Like, is that a good idea?
If you download the AAMC letter writer guide, it actually has all the competencies in that guide. And so I think it's a great idea to think about which of the 17 competencies you would like your letter writer to comment on, and even like mention that in your request. You could say, I've attached the letter writer guide. You can see the list of competencies based on the experiences you've had with me. I really think it would be best, I really think you'd be a great person to comment on this, this, and this. Does that make
Okay.
sense, Sierra?
Yeah, that does. And if I know we've discussed this before, but it was kind of short. What if they ask you to write a draft format?
Yeah, so that happens sometimes. And if you get asked to do that, I would talk to the professor about how they can help you with that, because they should help you. You shouldn't solely be writing it, but sometimes that happens, and sometimes you have to work with them to help them get more information about you in order for them to write that letter.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
For a doctor's letter of rec, or especially, or for schools, how good should they be? Oh, well, are you worried about someone writing a not great letter for you? If that's what this means, a couple things. Technically, you're not supposed to see the letter. If they show you the letter and you see the letter and you think it's not good, um, oh, they don't know you that well. Okay. Well, here's the thing. If you use AMCAS, if this is a physician letter and you're using AMCAS, if you're nervous about the letter, my advice would be, don't release that letter to every single school. If you have certain schools that require physician letters, you can release it only to those schools, or use some strategy, like maybe only release it to half of your schools, because if you think there's any chance that the letter is harmful to you in some way, don't release it to every single school, because then every single school will see it. You can pick and choose which letters go to which schools with AMCAS, so you can be a little strategic there. Any other, does that answer your question? Okay. I get asked a lot with science faculty, well, they don't really know me. I sat in a class of 500 or it was on Zoom, and what could they possibly say about me? And that's totally fair. Hopefully, if you were on Zoom, you had your camera on, which I know not many people do. But if you could, in some way, tell them the experience you had in that class. So let them know that you came to their office hours. Let them know you went to the TAs for help, that you went to any, any type of discussion sections. Basically show them how engaged you were with the learning. If there was ever a time where you had a really good conversation with them about something, reference that conversation. Basically do anything you can to bring up the memories. And sometimes people maybe didn't do so hot in the midterms. Let's say you took your first midterm and you really bombed it the first time. If you got better, meaning you went and you got help, you got tutoring, you went and talked to them, and they told you some study strategies and you implemented those strategies, and then your midterm grades went up, that's an experience that you can share with them. You could say, you really taught me so much about myself as a learner. You might not realize this, but my first midterm, I got an F, and after 2 sessions with you, I was able to raise that to an A. And that's an experience now they can draw upon and say, oh, this person has persistence and this person has the capacity for improvement. And they can look at those competencies and say, oh yeah, I can see how this person demonstrated some of those from that experience. So you have to kind of create that narrative, your academic narrative for them. Otherwise they won't remember you because they had 500 people. um Good stuff. You guys are asking great questions. And thank you, Charlie, for posting all of these great resources for them. I always recommend people download the letter writer guide when they ask for letters of rec, because it's helpful for people who don't write a lot of letters. All right. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, I guess we will wrap it up for the day.